I caught her red-handed on a Tuesday morning, dragging my trash bins across the street like she'd just scored a discount rug at a yard sale. I stood at the edge of my driveway, coffee in hand, blinking like I was in some kind of HOA-themed fever dream. Wendy. "What the hell are you doing with my bins?" Wendy Haskins, our local HOA president and self-declared neighborhood queen, didn't even flinch. She turned with that tight-lipped expression she always wore when she was about to say something insane. "These bins were out past the acceptable retrieval time. HOA policy says I can confiscate them. Page 6, paragraph 3, I stared at her. "That's not a real thing. I read the bylaws last week. Nothing says you can steal my property because I work night shifts. I'm not stealing. I'm enforcing order." She kept dragging them toward her garage like she was hauling off radioactive waste. I stepped in front of her. "Wendy, put the bins down." "I will not be threatened," she snapped, whipping out her phone like she was summoning the HOA Avengers. "You are being aggressive. I'll be reporting this to the board." "I am the board," I said. "You booted everyone else last fall." She scowled, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. Wendy had been running our HOA like a dictatorship ever since she bullied her way into the presidency 2 years ago. Most of us just avoided conflict with her, but I wasn't most people. I took a step forward. "Put the bins down." She did what all Karens do when they're losing. She called the cops. "They'll arrest you for obstruction," she warned, cradling her phone like a sacred relic. "I've already documented that your home violates HOA standards. The lawn has overgrown patches and your trash bins were out for 37 hours. They were out for 12. That's not what I logged." 15 minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled up. I stayed calm, arms crossed, while Wendy practically ran to the officers like a kid tattling in kindergarten. "That man is threatening me," she said, pointing at me. "Also, he's trespassing. That's technically HOA-managed property. I'm the acting custodian." The taller officer blinked. "You're saying he's trespassing on his own driveway?" "Yes," she said, completely serious. "As HOA president, I have legal authority over common property and adjacent lots. These bins were in violation. I was retrieving them." The shorter cop coughed into his hand, trying not to laugh. The taller one turned to me. "Sir, is this your house?" "Yep, got the deed inside. Want to see it?" He nodded. I went inside and came back with the paperwork. While he looked it over, the other officer asked Wendy, "Where exactly is the rule that lets you claim someone else's trash bins?" "Page 6, paragraph 3, she said, smug. The cop flipped through the printed HOA rules she handed over. "This page talks about lawn height and mailbox colors." "That's because," she hesitated, "you have to interpret the spirit of the rule." The officers looked at each other and then both burst out laughing. "Ma'am," one said, "you can't just take people's trash cans." "That's not how this works." Wendy's face turned the color of canned tomatoes. "Well, I demand he be cited for obstruction." The cop handed me back my deed. "Yeah, we're not doing that. Sir, you want to press theft charges?" I looked at Wendy, still clutching one of my bins like it owed her rent. "Not yet, but I want this logged. If she steps on my property again without cause, I will." Wendy huffed and stomped off, bins left behind like a failed coup attempt. As the squad cars pulled away, I looked down at the battered trash bins and muttered, "This is going to get worse before it gets better." The morning after the trash bin fiasco, I found a folded note on my windshield, tucked under the wiper in neat, aggressive handwriting. "Unpermitted window tint. Correction due within 72 hours or face fine. HOA compliance." I stared at it, jaw clenched. My car hadn't moved from the driveway in 2 days. I hadn't changed anything about the tint since I bought it last year. But now, apparently, it was criminal. I walked back inside and pulled out the folder I'd started compiling last fall. In it were dated photos of my property, receipts, and most importantly certified copies of every HOA rule. I'd been documenting everything since Wendy's so-called beautification ordinance had gotten my neighbor slapped with a violation for using a blue welcome mat. I spent the rest of the morning at the DMV, where I requested a statement confirming my tint was factory standard and compliant with state law. Then, I stopped by City Hall and filed a public nuisance complaint, citing harassment and abuse of authority. The clerk behind the counter raised an eyebrow when I mentioned the HOA name. "You're the third person this month to report something about them," she said. "You might want to talk to a city code officer. They've been looking into some irregularities." That caught my attention. By the time I got home, there was a second note on my door. "Unapproved exterior lighting. Your porch fixture is in violation of community aesthetics. Submit request to modify or face daily fines." I looked up at the light. It was a plain black sconce, same model as half the houses on the street. I grabbed my phone and took a photo of it, time-stamped and geo-tagged, then walked across the street to Lisa's house. She was one of the few neighbors who hadn't been cowed into silence. She opened the door, already holding a mug of tea, saw the note. "She's escalating. Did she hit you with anything recently?" "Twice this week. First for a non-compliant flowerbed border, then for having a grill visible from the sidewalk. My backyard is fenced." I nodded. "She's fishing for pushback." Lisa leaned against her frame. "She's not just fishing. She's drowning in power." I asked if she had copies of her violations. She handed them over. Identical formatting, same ink, even the handwriting matched the one on my windshield. That night, I walked the block with a clipboard and a purpose. People were hesitant at first, but when I showed them the photos, the notes, and the DMV letter, a few cracked. By 9, I had 6 affidavits from residents claiming false violations, a few with photos of Wendy leaving notes without knocking, and one with a video of her on a ladder, measuring a front porch light with a tape measure at midnight. Early Wednesday morning, I drove to the county recorder's office and requested documentation on the HOA's board structure. The clerk handed over a stack of printed records. That's when I noticed something strange. The last official board election had been nearly 3 years ago. No meeting minutes since then. No public budget reports. I highlighted the last known board list and noticed 3 names. I recognized 2 retired couples who'd moved out last year, but the third, a man named Richard Lowry, I didn't know. A quick public search showed he was a CPA who'd passed away 2 years ago, so who was signing off on the fines? I returned that afternoon to find an envelope taped to my door. This one was thicker. Inside was a formal-looking citation with a balance due of $375. Listed violations included the tint, the light fixture, and bizarrely, excessively visible recycling. I walked to the garage and opened the bin. It was half full, newspapers and a cereal box. That was it. Then I noticed the envelope had a return address. HOA Compliance Collections with a P.O. box. No phone number. No contact name. I made a copy, then called the county attorney's office. I was transferred 3 times before someone picked up a sharp-voiced woman named Marla who listened carefully as I explained the situation. "Can you email me the documents?" she asked. I sent over the scanned notices, the letter from the DMV, and the public records showing the expired board. She asked me to hold. When she came back, her tone had changed. "You're not the first person to call about this HOA, but this might be the most complete file we've seen. Is this enough for an investigation?" "It's enough for a warrant." I blinked. "A warrant? We've suspected financial misconduct. If what you're saying is true, they've been collecting fines without legal authority. That's fraud." Less than an hour later, 2 county investigators were at my door. I handed over everything I had. They asked if Wendy had ever provided a breakdown of how collected fines were being used. I laughed. "She says it's private HOA business. That's not how it works." They thanked me, told me not to confront her, and left. By Friday, word had spread. Wendy's tone shifted noticeably. She came around with a clipboard and a forced smile, asking if everything was to our satisfaction. No more notes. No more violations. Then Saturday morning, she made a mistake. She tried to deliver a corrected fine to Lisa's mailbox. Lisa was waiting, camera running. "You're not allowed to touch mailboxes," she said as Wendy slipped the envelope inside. "I'm simply distributing community updates." Lisa raised her phone. "Federal code says otherwise. Tampering with mail is a felony." Wendy froze. "I didn't tamper, I placed a notice into a mailbox." "Without postage, that's mail fraud." The next day, 2 unmarked vehicles pulled up in front of Wendy's house, not police suits. They didn't knock. They walked around the side, clipboard in hand, then entered through the front door without her opening it. Legal access. They had a warrant. She was escorted out 20 minutes later, arms crossed, shouting about conspiracies and ungrateful neighbors. As she was led to the car, she turned to me across the street. "You did this." "No," I said. "You did." By evening, we had a neighborhood meeting on my lawn. For the first time in 2 years, people laughed, shared drinks, and compared the absurdity of their violations. One guy had been fined for inconsistent grass patterns, another for reflective glare from a car hood. The following week, the county posted a formal notice. The HOA's authority was suspended pending investigation. A temporary board was appointed, made up of actual residents. I was asked to serve as interim chair. I didn't want the job, but I took it. Because someone had to clean up the mess, and because no one should ever have to call the police over a trash bin, Monday morning arrived with a quiet tension in the air. Wendy's house, once the epicenter of HOA tyranny, now sat with the blinds drawn and a county-issued notice posted on the door. The neighborhood, still recovering from the spectacle of her being escorted away, had started to breathe again. But I had a feeling the fallout was just beginning. I was in the middle of sorting through the HOA's seized documentation records, sent over by the county's temporary board liaison, when I found something that made my stomach turn. Among the scanned digital files was a spreadsheet simply titled Collection Summary. It listed dozens of fines, some dating back more than 2 years. Next to each entry was a column labeled Private Fund Transfer with amounts marked complete. No bank names, no explanations. Just $signs and initials. I dialed the liaison. "Is it normal for HOA fines to be transferred to private funds?" There was a pause. "Absolutely not. That would be embezzlement." "Then we have a serious problem." I forwarded the file. Within 20 minutes, my phone rang again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. A woman introduced herself as Detective Alina Ruiz with the County Financial Crimes Unit. "I've been assigned to the case as of this morning. We reviewed the document you submitted. Do you have access to the originals? They're in the county's temporary board archive. Keep them secure. And don't discuss the details with anyone else just yet. We may be looking at large-scale misappropriation, possibly wire fraud." That evening, I met with the other temporary board members, Lisa included, in my backyard. We kept the mood serious. There were no drinks this time. Lisa leaned forward. "How deep do you think this goes?" "Farther than we thought. There's over $40,000 in undocumented transfers." A retired contractor named Joe, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years, crossed his arms. "Where would she even hide that kind of money?" "I don't know," I said, "but I guarantee we're not the only neighborhood she's done this in." He frowned. "Wendy's been here for 5 years, but before that, she lived in a different HOA on the other side of the county. She mentioned it once at one of her compliance briefings, said they didn't appreciate her methods." I turned to Lisa. "Can you look into that HOA, see if they had issues?" She nodded. "I've got a friend who works at the tax assessor's office. She might have access to their filings." The next morning, I got an email from Lisa. The HOA Wendy used to run had been dissolved 3 years ago after a fraud investigation. The files were sealed, but the reason listed was unrecoverable funds and procedural misconduct. Different neighborhood. Same story. That night, Detective Ruiz knocked on my door in plain clothes, flashing her badge. She stepped inside, set her bag down, and opened a slim laptop. "We've issued a subpoena for Wendy's personal financial accounts. The judge approved it this afternoon." There's a pattern of withdrawals from HOA accounts deposited into private investment portfolios. The names are different, but the routing numbers match. She was laundering fines into what appears to be a shell company registered under a fake LLC in Nevada. Lisa, who had joined us as a witness, asked, "Is that enough to arrest her?" "More than enough," Ruiz said, "but we're going further. We think she may have filed fraudulent liens against homeowners who never paid the fines." My chest tightened. "You mean she tried to take people's homes?" "Not all the way. But she created the appearance of debt, filed notices of default with the county, and used that as leverage to scare people into paying. Mostly older residents, some of them didn't even realize the liens weren't enforceable." Lisa's voice shook. "That's extortion," Ruiz nodded. "And it's going to stick." By Wednesday, the county issued a formal press release. Wendy Haskins had been charged with felony embezzlement, wire fraud, attempted extortion, and misuse of public documents. The sheriff's office confirmed she had been using a P.O. box registered under a false name to funnel payments. The statement also revealed she had been impersonating former HOA board members through forged digital signatures. The news spread like wildfire. Local media picked it up by noon. By 4, a news van was parked at the end of our street. They didn't need to knock. Residents came out in droves, finally eager to talk. An elderly man named Frank, who had lived in the neighborhood since the early 90s, approached the cameras with a folder full of printed violations. "She fined me for having a non-neutral bird feeder," he said. "Said it violated color harmony. I paid because I didn't want trouble." A single mom named Tasha spoke next. "She threatened to report me to child services if I didn't replace my fence. Said it was a hazard. I didn't know she had no legal power." By the end of the day, the county had opened a victim restitution fund. I was asked to assist in verifying claims. Over 70 households submitted documentation. The total estimated losses, just over $82,000. Thursday morning, I received a certified letter from the district attorney's office. I had been listed as the primary civilian witness in the case. They asked if I would testify when the preliminary hearing was scheduled. I agreed. Not because I wanted to be in the spotlight, but because someone had to speak for the people who had been silenced. Later that afternoon, I visited one of the homes near the edge of the neighborhood. The owner, a retired Navy mechanic named Harris, had refused to attend any previous meetings. I figured he might have his reasons. He answered the door wearing a grease-stained polo and holding a socket wrench. "Didn't think you'd come out here," he said. "I'm trying to make sure nobody else gets burned." He motioned me inside. The place was tidy if a little cluttered. On his coffee table sat a stack of unopened envelopes, all from the HOA. I stopped opening them after the third one threatened to escalate enforcement. I didn't owe anything. I don't even use the community pool. I asked if I could photograph the envelopes for the record. He agreed, then walked to his garage and returned with a manila folder. "This is the part that matters," he said, handing it over. Inside were 5 letters, all on HOA letterhead, demanding payment under threat of legal action. But what caught my eye was the notary stamp on the bottom of one. It was fake. I ran the notary license number through the state database. It belonged to a woman who had died 4 years ago. That was it, the nail in the coffin. I sent the photo to Detective Ruiz. Her reply came quickly. "This proves intent to defraud. We're updating the charges." Saturday came, and with it, the first community vote under the temporary board. We met in the community park where folding chairs circled the gazebo. The turnout was enormous, easily over 100 residents. This time, people weren't afraid, they were angry, focused. We passed 3 resolutions. A full audit of all HOA activity for the past 5 years, the establishment of a rotating community oversight board, and most importantly, a permanent ban on any single resident holding majority control of the board. As the sun dipped low over the trees, Lisa turned to me. "Think she ever thought it would end like this?" I shook my head. "People like her never think it ends." We sat in silence for a moment, watching kids ride their bikes down the street, free from clipboard inspections or surprise violations. Then Joe approached with an envelope. "This came to my house by mistake. It's addressed to you." I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, no return address. "You may have won the neighborhood, but you don't understand the system. People like me don't disappear. We relocate." I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. Lisa frowned. "Do we report it?" I nodded. "Already did." Ruiz had warned me people like Wendy often had connections, or at least delusions of them. But even if she tried to run her games somewhere else, we'd left a paper trail a mile long. Her name was flagged, her methods exposed, and here in this neighborhood her reign was over. 3 weeks after the neighborhood vote, I was ankle-deep in paperwork, most of it passed down from the county's temporary oversight office. The HOA's office, once Wendy's personal lair, had been cleared out and converted into a shared workspace for the new board. A folding table, a few borrowed laptops, and a community printer were all we had. It felt like a war room built out of thrift store scraps, but we were making progress. What we hadn't expected was the audit from the state comptroller's office. The request came in on a Thursday morning, delivered by a courier with a clipboard and 2 sealed envelopes. One was addressed to the temporary board, the other to me personally. The board's envelope contained a formal audit demand, citing inconsistencies in financial records across multiple residential associations. Apparently, Wendy's fraudulent practices weren't isolated to just our neighborhood. The state had traced similar forged documents to 2 other HOAs, both of which had appointed her treasurer or compliance officer at one point. My envelope contained a deposition summons. It wasn't just a local case anymore, this had turned into a statewide investigation. I met with the state's senior auditor 3 days later at a downtown office building near the courthouse. The man who greeted me was older, lean, with a sharp crease in his shirt collar and a 1,000-yard stare that said he'd seen more cooked books than a grillmaster. "She used the same fraudulent notary seal in all 3 associations," he said, flipping through a series of scanned documents. "Same license number, same signature style. But she altered the date formats slightly to avoid detection. How far back does it go? She's been doing this for at least 6 years. She created shell companies under different names and funneled the collected fines into those accounts. When the balances got too high, she dissolved the LLCs and opened new ones. The only reason we caught it is because she got sloppy, used the same P.O. box address on 2 unrelated filings." I leaned back in the chair. "What happens now?" "There's a grand jury panel convening next month. She's looking at multiple felony counts: fraud, racketeering, unauthorized lien filings, and impersonation of a public official. If convicted, she won't just do time. She'll lose any ability to work with public funds again." Back in the neighborhood, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. People were planting gardens, repainting shutters, and for the first time in years, nobody was measuring anyone else's lawn with a ruler. Even Frank, the bird feeder guy, had installed a bright red one shaped like a flamingo just to celebrate. But just when we thought the storm had passed, something new surfaced. Lisa called me from the new HOA voicemail system we'd set up. Her voice was tight. "We've got a message from a title company. They say there's a lien on my property. From the HOA." "That's not possible," I said. "All lien authority was frozen by the county. They faxed me the document. It's dated last week." I drove straight to her place. She handed me the paper as soon as I stepped inside. It was the same format as the fraudulent ones we'd uncovered, but this one had a new notary seal, different number, but clearly fake. The kicker: it was signed by someone named Thomas Greer, listed as the HOA's legal counsel. We didn't have a legal counsel, never had. I called Detective Ruiz immediately. She picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you're not calling about a new lien." One just showed up at Lisa's. "New alias, new seal, same format." She let out a breath. "She's still active." That means she's either posting these remotely or she has someone else doing it for her. Can we trace this Thomas Greer? We'll issue a subpoena for the signature and notary stamp. But if she's using digital forgeries, it might take time. Lisa's worried this could freeze her refinancing. That's a real risk. Tell her to notify her lender immediately and flag the lien as disputed fraud. We'll fast-track the investigation. Within 24 hours, the lien was confirmed fake. The notary number didn't exist, but the bigger revelation came from a tracking number Lisa found on the envelope an overnight shipment from a mail center in Texas. Ruiz called me that night. We think she's operating this through a remote printing service. Uploads the forged documents, pays for overnight delivery, and they do the rest. Can you shut it down? We're working with federal postal inspectors now. If we can prove she used the service to transmit fraudulent legal documents across state lines, it becomes a federal offense. By the end of the week, the FBI was involved. They issued a federal warrant for her arrest on interstate fraud charges. Turns out, Wendy had violated the terms of her release by attempting to interfere with witnesses and continuing her fraudulent activity. She was tracked down in a rented condo 2 counties over, living under the name Deborah Sellers and working as a community consultant for a new housing development. She was arrested without incident. The case went to trial 6 months later. I testified alongside Lisa, Frank, and 5 other victims from our neighborhood. The courtroom was packed. No one was there for Wendy. Not a single supporter. The prosecution laid everything out: fake fines, forged liens, shell companies, false signatures, and mail fraud. The judge listened carefully, occasionally raising his eyebrows as each new scheme was detailed. Wendy chose not to testify. Her attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, citing stress and overwork, but the paper trail was damning. Every action had been deliberate, every signature calculated. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. She was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 34 years in state prison with no eligibility for parole for at least 25. The judge ordered full restitution, over $120,000 to be returned to various victims, plus an additional civil penalty for each fraudulent lien filed across state lines. After the verdict, the state attorney general held a press conference. He called it one of the most egregious abuses of HOA authority in state history. New legislation was proposed that month to increase oversight and require annual audits of all HOAs with more than 25 homes. It passed unanimously. Back in the neighborhood, we dismantled every remnant of the old system. The board was now staffed by rotating volunteers with term limits and open book accounting. We even set up a community garden in the lot behind the pool, where Frank taught kids how to grow tomatoes without getting fined for inconsistent row alignment. Lisa started a neighborhood newsletter. The first headline: "No more clipboard tyrants." I kept Wendy's first fake fine framed and hung in the new board office, not as a trophy, as a reminder, because power, when left unchecked, doesn't just corrupt, it invites predators. And sometimes, the only thing standing between a community and the next Wendy is one person willing to say, "No, not this time." That spring, I stood in my driveway, coffee in hand, watching the recycling truck lift my bin without ceremony. No notes, no drama, just a quiet, ordinary Tuesday. And for the first time in years, that felt like a victory.